Hey everybody, Tim here with today's episode of Enterprise, Season 4, Episodes 7, 8, and 9, The Forge, The Awakening, and the Kir'Shara. I don't speak Vulcan, I don't know if that's how you say it, but whatever. So overall, I would say this actually reminds me of the last three-parter. Started out super strong and then slowly weakened as we kept going. And somebody else said, like, in the last three-part episode, somebody commented, like, you know, it's like they kept hammering the same thing over and over again. That's kind of how I felt with this one as well. And to kind of go back, as I've said over and over and over again, like, the Vulcans seem really awkward throughout this whole series. Like, T'Pol doesn't believe in time travel. She seems super emotional throughout the series. They don't know anything about mind melds, and it's almost like this disgusting disease that people do it. Over and over and over again, I've commented, like, how do we go from this to Spock, who does time travel almost on a monthly basis, who does mind melds almost on every episode, stuff like that. And people kept commenting from the very beginning, from the pilot episode, oh, they explain it. If this is the explanation, I'm really disappointed. Like, I don't know. Like, to me, this is not an explanation. This whole three-parter was more of a cop-out than it was an explanation. So, from the beginning, I did really like the part where Soval is talking to Archer, and he's like, you have, like, the audacity of an Andorian, the stubbornness of a Tellarite, the warlike personality of a Klingon. Like, he's going through all these different species. And he's like, you know who you remind me most of? And Archer's like, who, bitch? Who? And Soval's like, you kind of remind me of Vulcans in our early years. Like, it took us like 1,000 years to gain self-control and go out into space. You did it in like a century. And that scares the Vulcans. So I was like, okay, fine. And as he was going down this list, I was like, he's going to say we remind them of ourselves. And sure enough, he's like, you remind me of Vulcans. And I was like, fuck, I knew it. So as we go through, the big, like, I don't know, start of this episode is the embassy on planet Vulcan of Earth is, like, bombed. There's an explosion, and it kills 43 people, including Forrest, who actually kind of surprised me, because he's been here since, like, the pilot episode. So I was like, oh, wow, they actually, like, killed, like, a big character. I was kind of surprised. And 12 Vulcans. So 43 people, 12 Vulcans, that's 31 humans. 31 humans dead. So I was like, wow, that's actually kind of surprising. Now, the bomb has DNA on it of T'Pau. And I was like, oh, shit, like, I know who this is. So T'Pau was in the original series. So 100 years from now, we know she's still around kicking it. And she's in the episode Amok Time. That's the one where, like, Spock does his Ponfar and stuff like that. And even after that, we see her again in Voyager. That's the episode where the Doctor's trying to get, like, different personalities, and he actually creates a holographic version of T'Pau. So I was like, oh, so this is the third time we've seen this character. The first time chronologically, but the third time, like, systematically. So I was like, that's actually kind of cool. So, the bomb has her DNA on it. Of course, it's fake. I did love the emergency beam out scene where, like, Malcolm and Mayweather are, like, holding the thing up. And he's like, if we beam out, like, it has to be quick. I was like, that's actually a pretty good scene. I really liked it. We see Archer and T'Pol going through the desert, and the Shirak, I think is what it's called, which has been talked about numerous times. Most notably in the original series, Amanda said that Spock had a pet version, and then in the animated series we actually got to see that pet. And so now, of course, in Enterprise we see, like, the CGI version of it, of the wild one, and even T'Pol says, like, oh yeah, they're pretty domesticated, like, this is just a crazy one. And it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So we see the Searites, I think is what they called, and just, like, him asking questions. And I didn't write down the questions, but I think those, like, I'm pretty sure those are the questions from the third movie, The Search for Spock. No, one of the movies that, like, when Spock is recovering from like being reborn. So it has to be, I think, the third or fourth movie. Probably the fourth movie. And, like, he's doing all of the questions. Like, I'm pretty sure those are the exact same questions that they ask him. I didn't look it up, but I'm pretty sure they are. And it's like, what is the third law of logic? Or whatever. Who cares? Saval, we see Saval, and we learn that Saval can actually do a mind meld, and he does it to see who the bomber was. So Saval gets a lot more character development in this episode. And then the whole scene where, like, the guy that Archer and T'Pol meet in the desert, and he, like, grabs Archer, and he's like, remember, in whatever Vulcan language, is a clear shout-out to, again, The Wrath of Khan, where Spock does that to Bones. So a lot of, like, shout-outs to previous series and previous episodes going on. And like I said, this is all just in the first part. Going into part 2, it's a lot less, where, like, we finally meet T'Pol. She's kind of disappointing. Like, maybe because I think of her as, like, an older woman, and then we see her as a young woman in this. I don't know. I was a little bit disappointed. We also see some flashbacks, because the character from the first episode where he, like, puts the chakra or whatever into Archer. So Archer starts seeing Sirach, who is, like, the father of logic and the guy that, like, brings order to Vulcan, who we've also seen before. We saw him in the Savage Curtain, which is kind of funny, because in the Savage Curtain we saw Kahless, who we saw multiple times in, like, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, stuff like that, and now we see Sirach. And then again, it's not quite the same character, but it's pretty close. So we see a representation of him in the Savage Curtain. And then from here, like, they basically, when T'Pol forces another mind meld on Archer to find the artifact, the Kir'Shara, whatever, and stuff like that. So it's kind of funny, because, like, she's like, well, Archer agreed to it, and T'Pol's like, if he didn't agree to it, you were going to force it out of him. So either way, he would have had to have done it. And it's funny, she said it almost the same time I verbally said it. So it's, at least the writers knew that people were going to argue that point. And finally, by the time we get to the third part of this episode, and we see Sharan and the whole, like, Vulcan and Andorian war going on, I was just so done with the episode. Like, I was like, I get it. You could have, like, the first 3-part episode, you could cut out enough of the filler material to just make this 2 really good episodes instead of 3 mediocre episodes. And then we get, like, a lot of other stuff, like Koss basically divorces T'Pol. He's like, I mean, I blackmailed you into marrying me to reinstate your mom, and now she's dead. So, you know what? We can go ahead and just, like, end our marriage. And it's like, oh, that's really sweet of you, I guess. And clearly, I'm assuming her and Trip are going to end up together, but whatever. And then the last part of the episode, the big, like, cliffhanger, is seeing a Romulan, which is this is the first Romulan we've seen. And I liked how he actually had, like, the forehead ridges, which, if you go back to the original series, Mark Leonard, I believe, was the first Romulan we ever saw, who later on went to play Sarek, the Spock's father. And, like, Romulans and Vulcans, like, granted they share a same heritage, they look the exact same in the original series. And then when you get to the Next Generation, that's where they start to get those forehead ridges. And this one looks more like a Next Generation Romulan than he does an original series Romulan. But still, it's interesting, because if Enterprise had continued, they were going to do the Romulan War that was talked about in the original series. So the fact that they were already placing those seeds, I think, was super interesting. I think it's interesting, but I also think that it was, like, almost a cry of desperation. Like, oh, please keep us going so we can see more Romulans. But overall, I don't know. As I've said over and over again, the Vulcans are super awkward throughout this whole series, And it seems like this three-parter was that point where it's like oh hey, now those Vulcans are gone, and the Searites, or whatever they're called, are going to take over. So mind melds are going to be common. We believe in time travel now and stuff like that. And I don't know. I felt like it was a super cop-out, and I just wasn't buying it. So for those who have seen this three-parter, what did you think? Was this the explanation you guys all wanted for the Vulcans? What did you think about Forrest dying? What did you think about the Romulan at the end? What did you think about T'Pau? Go ahead, let me know, and I will see you guys next time for Daedalus.